Hello guys, welcome to my channel. In this video, we will discuss the fall of an emperor. The morning mist clung to the fields of Waterloo, shrouding the armies that stood on the brink of history. It was June 18th, 1815, and Napoleon Bonaparte, the fallen emperor of France, had returned for one final bid to reclaim his empire. Facing him was the Duke of Wellington, leading the allied forces of Britain, Prussia, and their European allies. This would be the battle that determined the fate of Europe. As the sun broke through the clouds, Napoleon surveyed his forces, his piercing gaze calculating every advantage. He had chosen his ground wisely, believing in the superiority of his tactics and men. Wellington, a master of defense, had positioned his troops along a ridge, ready to withstand the French onslaught. Nearby, the Prussian army under General Blücher was marching to join the fight, but whether they would arrive in time remained uncertain. At midday, Napoleon launched his first attack, sending his artillery to rain fire upon Wellington's lines. The ground trembled under the force of the bombardment, and smoke thickened the air. Then came the infantry, surging forward like a relentless tide, clashing with the disciplined redcoats of Britain and their Dutch and Belgian allies. The French pushed hard, capturing the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte, a critical position in the center. Wellington's men fought with grit, holding their ground with bayonets and musket fire. The battlefield was a nightmare of smoke, blood, and shattered bodies. Just as it seemed the French would break the Allied line, the Duke's cavalry charged, scattering Napoleon's soldiers and forcing a temporary retreat. Napoleon, undeterred, studied the battlefield with an unwavering gaze. He knew that Wellington's army had endured losses and time was slipping away. He ordered Marshal Ney, his most trusted general, to launch a massive cavalry assault. French horsemen surged forward, galloping toward the enemy lines, swords gleaming. But Wellington had prepared for such a strike. His men formed squares, an impenetrable defensive formation, bayonets pointed outward. Cavalry charged again and again, but the British squares held firm, repelling each wave with disciplined volleys of musket fire. By late afternoon, the battle had reached its tipping point. Napoleon made his decisive move. He unleashed the Imperial Guard, his most elite troops, to crush Wellington's weary forces. The Guard had never been broken in battle, and their charge was meant to shatter the enemy's will. The ground trembled beneath their disciplined march, and their battle cries echoed across the field. But as they advanced, the British soldiers, hidden behind the ridge, suddenly rose and fired devastating volleys into their ranks. Cannon fire tore through their formations, and cries of pain mixed with the sounds of war. The Guard faltered. Wellington, seizing the moment, ordered a full counterattack. British and their allies surged forward, driving back Napoleon's forces. In the east, a new roar filled the air. Prussians had arrived. Blücher's troops stormed onto the field, attacking Napoleon's flank. The French army, already stretched to its limits, began to break. Panic spread and shouts of "La Garde recule! Guard is retreating!" rippled through the ranks. The impossible had happened. Napoleon's finest had turned back. As night fell, the French army collapsed, fleeing in chaos. Napoleon, realizing his dream had ended, abandoned the field. Wellington and Blücher met amid the carnage, victorious. The Battle of Waterloo had sealed the fate of Europe, marking the end of Napoleon's reign and ushering in a new era. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of horror. The once green fields were littered with the dead and dying. Soldiers moaned for help, some missing limbs, others gasping their final breaths. The surgeons worked tirelessly in makeshift tents, amputating shattered limbs without anesthetic. The air was thick with the stench of blood and gunpowder. Napoleon's defeat sent shockwaves across Europe. He fled to Paris, but the walls were closing in. Within weeks, he surrendered to the British and was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would live out his remaining years in isolation, writing his memoirs and reflecting on the empire he had lost. Wellington, hailed as the savior of Europe, turned to Britain a hero. Yet he understood that peace was fragile. The sacrifices of Waterloo were not just for victory, but for the hope of a future free from tyranny. In the years that followed, Europe reshaped itself, and the balance of power shifted. France, once the most dominant force, found itself under the rule of King Louis XVIII. The Congress of Vienna sought to create stability, redrawing borders to prevent another era of Napoleonic conquest. For the soldiers who had fought that day, memories of battle would never fade. They had stood in the firestorm of history, and though many had fallen, their names would live on in the annals of war. The field of Waterloo, once a stage of bloodshed, would become a monument to the cost of ambition and the resilience of those who stood against it. Years later, veterans of the battle would gather to recount their stories. Some bore scars, both physical and mental, while others struggled to find peace in civilian life. The victory had been won, but for many, the war had not truly ended. Even today, the echoes of Waterloo remain. It was not just a battle, but a defining moment in world history, a day when empires clashed, heroes were forged, and the course of history was forever changed.